I think it's fair to say that this is one of the biggest quote-unquote balance patches that Deadlock has ever seen, with nearly 2,000 lines of changes, including things like Lash getting a new parry animation where he deflects punches with his pecs, Wraith basically getting a full-on rework of her entire kit with 5 different card suits full of unique effects, and an adapted brand new ultimate. Paradox can now swap 6 players at once with her ult, mcginnis spawns a turret army when using her wall, Great Owls can now travel at Mach 10, so watch out for those ballistic missiles when fighting the mid-boss. All that, and Valve even added eggs to Deadlock. It's safe to say that this episode of Patch Notice will be a doozy. As always, I'm your host Jacky, and you're watching Patch Notice here on Dead Air. There's so much to discuss within this patch, with over 33 different heroes getting a mixed bag of changes, the general power level of Deadlock's cast has massively risen, and as a rule of thumb, a lot of tier 3 AP upgrades have now become heroes tier 2 AP power spikes in laning, and those heroes then got given brand new gameplay altering tier 3 upgrades on top. We also saw item and kit interplay becoming far more mechanically widespread throughout every hero in Deadlock, and on top of that, new heroes are no longer marked as new, so you can now mix and match them with the regular cast in your hero picks and even select them for preferred bans. There's even a few undocumented changes to boot, like the hideout now having the voting stickers replaced with a commemorative sticker to mark your participation in the Old Gods New Blood voting update. Very cool. Thank you, Yoshi. So before we really deep dive into this one and kick off the in-depth breakdown that myself and Daisy have been up all night cooking for what feels like an absolute eternity, let's have a brief word from the sponsor of today's video. Today's video is sponsored by tracklock. U.GG and tracklock have teamed up to release the best desktop companion app for Deadlock, allowing you to level up your game by using these tracklock features. Scout your opponents and teammates to identify their strengths and weaknesses with dynamic tagging. Track your in-game stats like souls and damage and compare it live to the Deadlock community with ranked benchmarks, so you'll know when you're having a really great game. You'll always know when mid-boss, bridge buffs, and jungle camps are about to spawn with the in-game timer overlays. With the tracklock desktop app running, your match history and statistics will stay 100% accurate. Download the tracklock desktop app today with our link down below and improve your game. Thanks again to tracklock and U.GG for sponsoring today's episode. And now, back to the video. Right then, with that aside, let's delve into the inner workings of tonight's Valve Change the Entire Game patch. I think that's what it's called, and kick off things with the movement quality of life changes to start. First up, you can now jump during slide, and dash jumps grant a very brief period of increased air control, giving you 30% of increased air control for 0.25 seconds. Firstly, I think it's easy to say that I'm a big fan of both of these changes. Overall, they vastly improved the potential skill ceiling for movement expression in the wider Deadlock community. Previously, by the way, if you didn't know, you'd be able to jump during sliding only when going down ramps or sloped surfaces. So you might be thinking, oh, this isn't a change, I've always been able to do this. Yeah, it only worked in those locations. Now it's possible to do it anywhere, so that clears up that misconception. Of course, on top of that, the short period of increased air control from dash jumping is just a nice cherry on top. As Valve continue to play around with gravity, air excel, air strafing, and movement, what feels like following Celeste's addition to Deadlock seemed like that really gave them a bit of a leg up in terms of trying to play around with some of these values more and not keeping it at a one-sock-fits-all size. Gameplay-wise, we've also seen some reasonable adjustments to both objective and trooper flow, alongside some changes to mid-boss and the soul values of objectives. Starting with the shrines, they are now easier to kill. The first one you destroy will have less HP, and the second will be harder to kill. The HP pool here has changed. It's gone down from 8100 on both to now being a 5,000 and then 10,000 split, with the HP escalating upwards and updating after the first one dies. This, of course, is the same mechanic we have with walkers, where they'll grow in survivability as you destroy them, so you should be familiar with this. Additionally, shrine attacks will no longer hit heroes underneath the shrine, but they did fix that bug where if you stood on top and just directly spammed into the shrine, you'd avoid taking damage or being cursed. So, unfortunate for you, Wraith mains. The Super Trooper bonus DPS was also increased, going up from a plus 40% increase to plus 60%. Super Troopers, of course, being the upgraded troops that will spawn in when a shrine is destroyed that you can use to reinforce your wave. Additionally, the middle lane troopers will now also get upgraded when either of the shrines die, rather than only when both die. This was of course added recently, but it seems like a lot of these changes should encourage more pressure from troopers and more open opportunities for split pushing and forcing fights in and around the base to potentially speed up game. You can see my thought process from that being the case with this next change. Killing a pair of base guardians will now spawn a zip boosted trooper wave to reinforce your push. And additionally, the medic banner troopers DPS will now grow by 3% per minute, alongside troopers in general now gaining 7 HP regen when out of combat, so they can self-sustain and be refreshed before they reach the next wave if they're not cleared. They also changed the trooper wave interval, increasing it from every 25 seconds to every 20 seconds, starting at the 35-minute mark, to keep your wave shoving at the enemy base. The souls rewarded on Guardians being destroyed was also buffed, with the bounty being increased from 1,000 to 1,500. Similarly, Walker's bounty also went up by an additional 500 souls per kill, from 3,500 to 4,000. And they'll actually be slightly easier to kill now as well, because Valve have tweaked the HP pool for Walkers. This has been adjusted to make them slightly weaker overall. You can see the values on screen now, but effectively we're just bringing it down so it's a little bit more in line, rather than being 6,800 at the first Walker, that's now just 6,000. Obviously you've lost 350 HP there off of the second Walker you kill, and then gained 100 HP on the third Walker. So swings and roundabouts, but for what it's worth, this is basically going to result in Walkers dying a little bit quicker. This next change should also make them die a fair bit quicker. They also tweaked the Walker's armor decay, lowering it overall in terms of the highest resistance and weakest resistance throughout a game of Deadlock. It's been rescaled from the original plus 75% armor that diminishes down to minus 50% at the 20-minute mark, to now instead be a plus 65% armor increase at the start of the game that then drops down to minus 65 over 18 minutes. So less armor total to play with, going down to a lower value at its end cap over a shorter period of time, for a quick way of explaining it. Soul bounty for base guardians was also increased from 750 souls per kill to 1,000. And this is the big one. Shrines now actually have a soul bounty at all. Previously it was 0 for the longest time, but now destroying them will grant you 2,000 souls on destruction. So there is a lot of benefits here from forcing you to attempt to push out your side lanes as quickly as possible in terms of garnering not only the base guardians, but also those shrines to get the increased wave, to get the increased push, and to get the extra souls as well. Yummy. I mean, in my opinion, I do think a lot of these changes, alongside the hero reworks and buff that we'll get into shortly, could result in a very snowball-heavy meta, with faster one-sided games becoming the norm, to be honest. It's going to be very feast or famine out there, in my eyes, from the optics of these gameplay changes. In terms of what's going on in the sewers, mid-boss will also now be granting a bigger bag, with base bounty being increased from 2,000 to 3,000. However, it will now have a little bit more HP to play with, as the base HP was increased as well, bumping it up by a reasonable margin to give it some more self-sustain, alongside having 35% debuff resistance. Although these are the two changes to mid-boss that I think are a little bit more interesting in my opinion. The mid-boss global callout for the low health threshold was reduced from 75% to 50%, making your decision to contest mid-boss now actually have a little bit more weight to it, because you won't have such an early warning. 50%, very burstable late game when you've got high DPS scaling to play with, so keep that in mind if you hear the call from the mid-pit. On top of this, even the rejuve drop duration has been sped up, with it now being reduced from 7 seconds to 6 seconds. So make sure you get your mental timings on the drop fleshed out so this doesn't throw you off and cost you that sweet, sweet rejuve steal. Lastly, that odd bug where rejuve duration would refresh if you saved one of the crystals to hit it later and refresh the duration of all of the currently applied crystals has been fixed. You might not have known about that one, but it was getting abused somewhat. It was a little bit more situational though, so just good to see Valve fixing that and the shrine bug inside of the objective changes here tonight. Moving on from the objectives, we also had a few changes to the general Deadlock mechanics, UI and map and such. Firstly, this is going to be a big one in terms of earn readability. Now, not only can you rely on the candles that will float around to indicate whether it's weighted on your side, or have to just do the quick mathematics to figure out if it's favored or not, it will actually now just tell you on the minimap. A nice change here with it alerting you if it's neutral, favored, or unfavored on the minimap itself, so you can quickly understand the earns drop off based on UI cues. I know a lot of people were asking for this, and I'm sure they'll be happy to see that Valve have listened. As a rule of thumb, by the way, that seems seems to be basically Valve's margin for a lot of the changes in this patch. It feels like a big one where they've really been looking through the forums, through the Reddit, through comments on even videos like this, and have basically come in with a lot of the quality of life changes people would like to see. So thanks Yoshi for that one. Very cool. Awesome to see a live service game that is not only developing to introduce new features, but is also developing around its community, which has been the core of Deadlock since day one. So they're killing it out there. Valve also added 2 new jungle camp locations, by the way. These are going to be featuring 2 tier 2 denizens and 3 tier 1 denizens on both of the Hidden King Park Walker and Archmother York Walker. You can see on screen where these camps are now. I'm pretty sure we used to have camps here a very long time ago, but it always felt quite awkward. They were gutted with the jungle rework going into the 3-lane variant of Deadlock, but they're back now. Interesting. Oh, the base as well also got some minor tweaks with changes to the shrine platforms. They now have 0-way veils underneath the shrine plinths in each of the bases, so you can't just get trapped under there and then be seen from all angles and feel like you've got hyenas all around. There is some degree of outplay now, so I'll take it. Additionally, they also slightly moved the mid-lane bridge that's above the Hidden King base entrance to be more in the middle of the 2 edges, so just one in terms of symmetry there. Additionally, they also fixed melee abilities not using conditional damage bases on enemy states, so this will affect things like close quarters, point blank, opening rounds. Curious to see how this feels, as there's a lot of melee interaction-based changes with items and also proccing off abilities inside of this patch, and it seems like they've just tried to make everything work, I suppose, as it would be assumed by a new player that didn't realize, oh, conditionals don't apply, certain things don't apply on various abilities. So it feels like basically it's going to really reinvent the wheel for some of the potential melee points that we could be hitting. You're going to be seeing Viscous is enjoying this one, Abrams could be back on the menu, a few different gameplay changes for some of the heroes that are now dealing more melee damage as well. So yeah, we'll go over this as we go through, but quite a big sleeper change in terms of the other changes that are going to be knocked on by this. Lastly then, for Street Brawl as well, a more minor one, but again a quality of life change that I think people will enjoy. They've removed the item slot limits. You won't need to sell items in the final round of Street Brawl anymore. This happens sometimes depending on how many items you got or what you were picking up based on rerolls and being granted bonus items. So just a nice one to not have to worry about anymore. Right then, let's crack our knuckles, put that all to one side, as it's finally time for the big ticket items, hero changes. Right then, Deadheads, I won't lie to you. With the sheer size of this patch, combined with the fact that Daisy and I are currently away on vacation right now, and I'm having to view into my PC to edit this, we've covered the biggest and most impactful nerfs, reworks, and buffs, so some of the more value-oriented smaller changes might be missing. So do check the notes for your main or heroes you're playing against regularly to stay in top form out in the Cursed Apple streets, if something's missing. Additionally, this patch was so bloody big that we even had smaller hotfix adjustments for items and heroes hitting the servers before we could finish documenting it all. So everything in this video will be reflective of the update following the latest balance patch hotfix that's out as of the time of posting. So check the video description, then check the forums. Alright, with that spiel out the way, let's have a look at what's happened in the patch. In my opinion, it feels like the theme of this patch is, if everyone is overpowered, no one is overpowered. Probably. Well, maybe apart from Shiv, as he's actually been kneecapped. Unlucky Shiv mains. Let's kick it off with big old Bluey, who's been surprisingly given a collection of buffs and mechanic adjustments to his kit. Firstly, for Abrams, his weapon damage was reduced from 3.86 plus 0.13 per boon to instead be a more weaker 3.6 plus 0.1 per boon. So that gun damage from Abrams will be going down somewhat, but the rest of this is more positive on the buff side if you are a big fan of the blue man. They've also made some pretty drastic changes to the way that Siphon Life works. One of the biggest changes here that it's now circular in shape rather than just being that sort of triangle cone in front of you. You can see the radius difference on the pre and post patch version and the before and after that's on screen now, although the range will no longer increase with spirit power, and they did tweak the visual effects so that it will show the larger than default range values, so you'll have an easier time distinguishing and visualizing the radius now, even into late game when it grows in stature. However, the lifesteal against heroes was increased from 66% to 80%, so self-sustained stonks are going up on Abrams. In regards to shoulder charge as well, the tier 1 was changed from plus 2.2 weapon damage for 8 seconds to instead now grant you plus 40% slow for 3 seconds, alongside that tier 2 AP upgrade on the wall stun, giving you an increased duration from 0.45 seconds to 0.8. They also whacked an extra 50 HP bonus health on Infernal Resilience's tier 2 AP upgrade, with it going up from plus 150 health to plus 200. And the tier 3 AP upgrade now also grants a plus 20% debuff resistance. This is a running trend throughout this patch. For his ultimate Seismic Impact, we saw the damage being increased from 75 to 100, alongside you now being allowed to use items during it. Something that seems to be a big trend inside of this patch for many hero ultimates, opening doors for warp stones, knockdowns, vortex webs, and many more applicable active items to be used mid-flight with his ultimate. Lastly, the tier 2 AP investment reward was changed from per hero hit plus 100 HP and plus 14% fire rate to instead increase that stun duration even more at a rate of plus 0.6 seconds. Anyway, Blue Man aside, from one Ixion to another, it's Apollo up next. No longer will the Sword Stab of Death be a get out of jail free card in many instances, where it will continue to chase you down no matter what else you throw at it, as Flawless Advance now gets interrupted by stuns and sleeps. His ultimate, however, Atani Lo-san, also had its base damage reduced from 225 to 190. And to compensate, the spirit scaling was increased from a rate of 1.6 to 2.3. However, Itani Lo-san's hit width no longer scales with radius increases. Which I think, in my opinion, is probably for the best, considering it would get gargantuanly long and wide. But let's get hooked away from Apollo though, as we've arrived at your favourite scrap golem, Bebop. Just the one patch note here. Hook can now be cancelled. Pretty self-explanatory quality of life change there, but it could have some sleeper gameplay interactions where if you hook a key member of the enemy team, maybe a pick hero, maybe someone that can disable you like a dynamo, you could bait them by making them think you're going to pull them into you and then cancelling your hook so they burst an ultimate or a big ability cooldown. So food for thought there. Next, let's pull Billy over though and see what's changed on the punk goat. Firstly, Bashdown had its tier 2 ability point upgrade changed from a rate of a plus 1.3 meter radius increase to instead be plus 1 charge and plus 2 meters radius. His base Rising Ram cooldown was reduced by plus 50% on impact, alongside the tier 1 AP upgrade being changed to work with this. It's no longer on impact minus 50% CD to instead now grant you on impact plus 25% weapon damage for 5 seconds, alongside the tier 2 being changed from on impact plus 35% weapon damage for 5 seconds to instead now be plus 0.3 seconds charge duration. You can see what I mean about this idea of kind of moving down the tiers and adding something new at the tier 3 AP upgrade. Blasted, where he smashes that bottle over his head, also saw some changes. The active duration no longer slows down the decay when doing bullet damage. Melee damage will still extend it though, so something to be aware of there. You're not going to be able to keep it up for as long in terms of just peppering people with bullets. You will need to throw fists. On top of that, the blasted passive itself no longer reduces enemy fire rate by a negative 14%. Chain Gang also got quite a few overhauls as well. Firstly, it will no longer grant the plus 15% spirit and bullet resistance to Billy, giving him a lot of damage mitigation to play with. It will now instead have its cooldown increased by 25 seconds from a rate of 125 to 150. So less resistance and a longer cooldown in the base version of Chain Gang. But they have played around with the AP rewards. Tier 1 has been changed for a negative 25-second cooldown reduction to instead be plus 40 spirit resist and bullet resist granted to Billy, with the Tier 2 no longer giving you that plus 15% spirit and bullet resist. Instead, that'll grant you a minus 50-second CD reduction. So kind of changing around the values on this one and when you get them. As for the tier 3 upgrade, they swapped out the 2-second unstoppable to a multi-target system that benefits you based on how many heroes you pull in, granting plus 1.3 seconds of unstoppable for each hero pulled by Chain Gang. Additionally, the tier 3 now also has an increased radius of Chain Gang by plus 5 meters, so a bit of rebalancing there. From goats to cats, it's time to zoom in on the calico changes. Couple changes in regards to Calico's gun. Firstly, the bullets no longer have gravity, and her weapon, Sweetest Lie, now fires an additional pellet right down the center. This center pellet is now considered the primary pellet for headshots, procs. However, the DPS output will remain the same as pre-patch, and you can see the visual spread differences on screen now. In a similar fashion, however, gloom bombs have also changed. The first grenade will also land in the middle, alongside the tier 2 AP upgrade being changed from plus 16.2 damage to plus 75 bonus damage versus barriers. So this feels like it could be a mixed bag of being either hyper useful versus wardens, celestes, pages, etc., but less effective on heroes without barriers or teams that don't overly invest into barrier-based items, but still nice to have some barrier shred, I guess. It goes to show this cat certainly got claws. Next, we saw some very big changes to Leaping Slash. Firstly, they improved the targeting system of the dash to end early if enemy heroes are nearby once it's in its path. You can also see the dash verticality will now work even if you're on the ground, allowing you to jump straight upwards without having to jump off the ground and then leap as you did previously. However, the AP upgrades are really where things get really crazy, as the tier 2 was changed from granting plus 40 damage instead to now give you 300 souls on hero kill, making Bank Calico potentially a pretty viable build here, with a window to claim these bonus souls being rather forgiving. It's an out there concept, but I'm kind of ideating the idea of step 1 being rush the egg in lane, step 2 only go for kills once you hit that tier 2 AP power spike on leap, and step 3 being profit. But just a rough concept. It is what it is. You will have to sacrifice that damage if you pick up the egg. We'll talk a bit more about the Golden Goose Egg later. Additionally, the tier 3 AP upgrade of Leaping Slash has been changed from a minus 50% CDR on hit to instead still grant that CDR, but it will come along now with plus 60 damage and overall have its range reduced from 4.5 meters to a more reasonable 4 meters. From Calico to Ava though, we've seen quite a few changes to a Peterbald cat. An Ava will now start at a minimum speed threshold and then ramp up, increasing to a maximum speed over time whilst running. This speed increase will also reset on taking damage. However, the tier 3 AP upgrade is the big one in my eyes, with Ava's tier 3 being changed from a minus 20% cooldown reduction and plus 35 health regen to a growing damage amp the longer you were transformed, capping out at a plus 20% flat damage amp for 6 seconds. The gank potential on this with Leaping Slash's new bounty mechanics could be huge. I'm thinking run in, leap, with that damage amp lingering for 6 seconds, and then peace out like a cat on the other side. For her ultimate return to Shadows though, it will now use the new channel bar style system, very pretty, and because of the damage amp being moved to Ava, the tier 3 no longer grants that plus 18% damage amp for 6 seconds, but it will give you 350 healing instead. Calico aside, it's Celeste that's back on our screens. Valve are continuing to play around with gravity and air control values for Celeste to try and get it feeling balanced following her debut to the cast, as we've seen being the trend with every patch she's been included in since her debut. For context on that, her gravity has been reduced from minus 20% to minus 28%, resulting in less gravity overall, whereas air control and air acceleration has also been reduced from plus 50/18% to be plus 38/12%, meaning she's got less air control and air acceleration in either category now. Movement tweaks out of the way, her orb of social distancing also got 2 changes. Shining Wonder's bounce range was reduced from 17 meters to 15 meters, making it slightly more viable to escape its bounce AoE, alongside bringing down the lingering effect of the duration from 4.5 seconds to 3.25 seconds, so it will expire slightly quicker if it cannot find that next target before looking for another bounce. So it just had a handful of smaller nerfs here. From little nerfs to big old buffs though, Doorfella enjoyers will be really happy with this one. Firstly, the Doorman's gun, service with a smile, will now pierce through targets at a 50% reduced damage rate. Big day for gun Doorman builders. Additionally, Call Bell saw some major overhauls. The time between charges was increased from 4 seconds to 6 seconds, and it will no longer have impact damage. But the explosion damage was increased from 55 to 85, with the Call Bell explosion damage spirit scaling also now being reduced from 1.7 to 1.4. The interesting part though is the AP upgrade tweaks, as this is where it gets serious. Call Bell tier 1 was increased from plus 2 meters to plus 2.5 meters radius, with the tier 2 explosion damage being increased from 40 to 75, alongside now increasing spirit scaling by plus 0.6. Then for the tier 3 AP upgrade, it's been reworked from impact causes half radius explosion to instead grant you 1 additional charge and plus 22 seconds of lifetime on the bells when they are thrown out. This also causes the radius to continuously apply its slow, allowing you to zone out with some bells and basically create bell-based minefields. Then for the namesake of the doorman, the doorways, the tier 3 AP upgrade for doorway distance will now also scale with spirit power at a rate of 0.25, allowing you to get some seriously crazy door distance between the placements. You can cover some wild ground with these now. Here's luggage cart is also now 20% larger with a 20% wider hitbox to match, and a tier 1 AP was changed from a negative 8-second cooldown reduction to instead grant you plus 60 damage. However, one of the biggest changes, hotel guest will no longer go on cooldown if a target dies during the cast, with the tier 3 reward being adapted from a minus 50-second cooldown to instead granting unstoppable whilst the hotel is occupied, alongside setting the cooldown to 13 seconds on failure to check out or death of a player if they're still inside the Baroness when they die. Suddenly, it's not so slick to be a hero with iframes built into your kit. You can't just briefcase or riposte the Baroness for free anymore, as you might just get sent straight back. You can leave the Hotel Baroness, but you can never check out. This was even more overpowered on initial release, being 10 seconds of a CD it was set to. Of course, now upped by 3 seconds to a far more reasonable 13 seconds. So some openings for crazy doorman Baroness spam is real. Even counterspell won't save you, as it still counts as failing to check out. Wild. Moving on from hotels to homeless, it's Drifter up next. For Drifter, we saw some really positive kit mechanical changes in my eyes, making him a far better hero in terms of his mechanical functionality. Firstly, Ren's bonus damage is now only melee damage at close range, meaning you'll now only do the melee damage at a close range period of distance between you and an enemy, with the spirit damage being the default application. Ren's tier 3 was also changed from gaining you plus 45% bullet lifesteal against afflicted enemies for 4 seconds to instead now close range attack silences enemies for 2.3 seconds. And additionally, Stalker's Mark was changed quite a lot as well, with it being adjusted on its tier 3 from giving you 2 charges and 2 seconds duration to giving you an additional plus 2% bleed and negative 40% healing. Ouch. Whereas his Blood Scent now grants Drifter the same amount of permanent bonus weapon damage when an isolated hero dies nearby, whether Drifter gets the kill or the assist. A huge change for those Drifter mains who would be pulling their hair out, screaming at their teammates for stealing their kills. So there you go, that one will help your hair grow back, you won't have to be so stressed. Additionally, the tier 2 was changed from isolated kills reduce cooldowns by 15 seconds and restore free stamina to instead be isolated deaths restore 18% of your missing health and restore 2 stamina, allowing him to gank, heal, and gank again. In regards to his ultimate Eternal Night, it will now make the targets afflicted by it to be considered as isolated. Nice bit of kit synergy there. AP wise, it will have its tier 1 change from plus 6.3 spirit damage proc to a 10-meter sprint, and this kicks in immediately, allowing some fast moves to close the gap or get away, with the tier 3 reward now being increased to have an additional 0.5 second duration on top of its usual buffs. Sprinting away on Drifter, however, leads us to the Professor himself, as Dynamo has had quite a few big changes to his kit. Okay, school will certainly be in session for those Dynamo mains, as a good portion of his kit has been tweaked massively. Firstly, a big one is the fact that kinetic pulse range no longer increases with spirit scaling. I guess you technically could call it a small one now. However, the tier 1 AP has been modified from a 35% move slow and minus 30% fire rate to instead be plus 1 charge, with his tier 2 being changed from plus 30% bullet damage for 8 seconds to instead reduce enemy bullet resistance by 18% and slow their move speed by a negative 30% application for 4 seconds. Lastly, for kinetic pulse, the tier 3 was changed from adding 104 damage and additional charge to giving you 135 damage and a 60 meter cast range. So that's where you get getting your range scaling from now. Quantum Entanglement also saw some very big reworks, with it no longer granting that plus 26% fire rate, and it won't be reloading weapons anymore. In a more support-oriented manner for escapes, it will now be built into its base ability level that it will restore 1 stamina upon use for you and your allies, with Entanglement's ally distance also being increased at a range of 10 meters to 13 meters, with the ability's base range also going up from 9 to 10 meters. The Tier 1 AP upgrade was also increased from plus 4 meters of range to plus 6 meters, with a Tier 2 removing its plus 22% fire rate increase to instead now be a minus 6 second cooldown reduction. Lastly, a big boon for more support-focused dynamos is that the Tier 3 AP upgrade reward was reworked from a negative 5 second cooldown and 120 ammo percent increase to instead now be a purge that will dispel non-ult debuffs for you and your allies affected by it. And additionally, Rejuvenating Aurora saw some quality of life adjustments. It will now have a 1 second linger on allies, and at its base level lets you jump whilst using it. So, from professors to students, it's Graves up next. A lot of hands-on changes to Grasping Hands, with the immobilized duration being reduced from 1.5 seconds to 1.25, alongside a slight cooldown reduction going down from 38 seconds to 34 seconds, with the Tier 2 also being tweaked. It will no longer grant you that plus 0.75 second immobilized duration, instead now being a plus 90 damage increase and giving you 10 meters in wall length. Whereas Valve changed the Tier 3 AP reward to compensate, with you now getting the range spike earlier, this Tier 3 will now be changed from that plus 15 meters of wall length and 10 seconds off the cooldown to instead give you 1 whole second of immobilized duration and reduce 12 seconds from the cooldown. Well, that's enough talk about hands though, let's have a look at daggers instead, as Haze also saw some bloody big changes. Firstly, it smells like a lack of Haze spirit, as her innate spirit per boon has been gutted from 1.1 to a flat 0, nada, zip. Alongside Sleep Dagger's wake up delay also no longer scaling with spirit. The dagger cooldown itself was increased from 26 seconds to 30 seconds as well, so 4 seconds longer between daggers at base values. Big changes for Smoke Bomb, however, as especially on its Tier 3 AP upgrade, it's been changed from enabling 2 charges and granting you that 0.5 seconds of invincibility to instead now being a dispel that will purge off non-ultimate debuffs and grant 30% lifesteal for 5 seconds. As much as the potential for some huge plays with the old Tier 3 invincibility was vast and a lot of players were really kind of struggling to use it, I think this new one, although technically weaker for what it is in terms of application, should be easier for the wider community to use and seek value from it, as you've always got to purge off debuffs and that is just a flat, easy to understand focus, whereas of course the invincibility was more situational and you had to get it pretty much perfect. Smoke Bomb's Tier 3 now also grants you +1 charge to the ability as well. Let's boogie on over to her ultimate though, as Bullet Dance's base ability has been given 60% bullet evasion built in, alongside the Tier 3 ability point upgrade now also allowing her to fire an additional target per tick, meaning that the stack the haze strategy to nullify her ultimate will be less effective in most instances now, requiring either your full team to stack inside the radius to dilute the damage output, or everyone to get away from her. The new and improved return fire could be a viable counter item here, and Metal Skin will always be a great counter to pick up against Haze overall anyway. From Dancing Haze to Disco Inferno, it's your favourite cursed apple bartender, Infernus. Blazing into the episode with some dash and napalm changes, let's see what Valve have done here. Firstly, a nice bump on Napalm's Tier 2 reward. You'll find the lifesteal increased by 5%, with Dash Furnace getting some big buffs. Flame Dash's Tier 1 was changed from a -25% fire rate to instead grant a -12 second cooldown, alongside the Tier 3 AP upgrade now also granting 1 charge and having the time between charges reduced from 20 seconds to 14 seconds. Dash builds were getting very popular lately and it seems like they're going to be very strong with these changes. So get out there and Naruto run through your foes, Infernus mains. Lastly, as a unique change, melee can now also build up Afterburn, with the values being 20% build up for a light melee and 35% for a heavy hit. Dashing away to Ivy then, let's see what's new for the Gargoyle. The Celeste influence on Deadlock's cast has even reached Ivy, with her now having an inherent built-in negative 10% gravity, making her more floaty. Although I do wish that she could just flap her wings to hover, similar to Mina at that point. They also renamed Kudzu Bomb to Entangling Fawns. The Fawns also had their tier 3 AP upgrade changed from granting you a 36 DPS increase and 2 meters of radius to instead making it so that entangled enemies that remain within inside the radius for over 2 seconds will get rooted, and this will last for 1.6 seconds. So you've actually got a root built into the ability now. Curious to see how optimized this one could be for some big plays, as it's relatively forgiving to escape before the root kicks in without increasing range scaling, in my opinion, at its base level. Valve also changed Watcher's Covenant to instead be called Kudzu Connection now. The tier 3 on Connection has also changed from adding +1 tether count to instead making it an always active ability, so you can always benefit from the replicated healing and open some doors for some serious support duo damage mitigation. Lastly, the ultimate airdrop was also massively adjusted, alongside having its cooldown reduced from 100 seconds to 65 seconds. It will now also grant you and your ally plus 20% outgoing damage after dropping. So some openings for some crazy buff damage drop-offs will be through the roof. Watch out for a Mo and Krill being dropped onto your head and comboing you straight back to the graveyard. Let's drop down onto the Iceman himself though and check out the temperature of Kelvin's changes. Massive adjustments here in terms of kit interplay and mechanical fluidity of Kelvin in my eyes. Firstly, Frost Grenade now comes with 2 charges at base, and it will also have that heal that you used to have to invest for built into the kit at base level, and this will apply a 60 HP heal and scale with Spirit at a rate of 0.9. The tier 2 of course had the heal removed to instead now be a unique effect in which it will freeze stamina regen and reduce the cooldown by -10 seconds. So you can actually massively halt escape attempts from players with grenades now. On top of all that, Arctic Beam now lets you cast Frost Grenade and items whilst using it. That's wild, but it seems like the bigger focus on this update is to make the link between abilities and items one step closer, following the trend of Vindicta and other new heroes that have much more accessible interplay to not only use their full kit of abilities, but also items and other abilities while something's being used. So Kelvin's got that trend here now, with what's gone from being a very clunky point-by-point kit to now everything works within itself. Few big changes to Kelvin's ultimate, with Frozen Shelter also being able to be cancelled first without ending your Ice Beam early, allowing you to retract the dome and still dome someone with the beam. Frozen Shelter itself is now an 8-meter unit target attack that will create the dome around the center of both heroes. It can also be self-cast to just create it around yourself as it used to work. Lastly, the Snow Globe tier 3 AP will also dispel non-ultimate debuffs on cast, and this will affect both you and allies in the radius. So you get a built-in purge there. That's enough Ice White talk though, let's check out Deadlock's sparkling star, it's Lash. Firstly, your prayers have been answered, Deadlock community, and the Lash has his sparkle back. Thank you, Valve. As an extra cheerio on top, he's been given a new parry animation, where he'll rebuttal his enemy's attacks with his pronounced chest slam, putting the pain in pegs. Very on brand and very cool. Imagine getting parried by that and having to contemplate your actions whilst Lash punches you to death. As one notable stat AP change I think is worth mentioning for Lash though, the grapple tier 3 has been changed from giving you 20% increased fire rate to instead now giving you plus 60% increased air control and 1 stamina back on usage. That's much better in my eyes. With the Lash's gun being a lesser element of his kit and the verticality and dive strike potential, hell even death slam, massively being opened up with new ground off of the back of this AP upgrade. Enough about everyone's favourite fighter though, it's time for mcginnis's mechanical madness. I'm talking of course about how there's been huge reworks to not only turrets, but also her ability to spawn them within 2 separate parts of her kit now. Firstly, the base mini turret duration has been increased from 24 seconds to 35 seconds, alongside the base healing and health growth being reduced by 40%. However, they do now have a native 35% melee resist, so you can't just one-bomb them to death with a melee. The mini turret tracking, angle, and projectile speeds have also been significantly improved, alongside these summons also now getting the Graves treatment, as they'll now appear on the minimap with icons flashing and turning red when they're attacking. Additionally, the tier 2 AP upgrade was changed from granting plus 10 meters of attack range and 10% fire rate to instead giving you 2 charges again and opening the door for way more heavy turret focused builds, but I'll expand on that in a second. Medicinal Spectre also saw some big changes, with the duration no longer scaling with spirit power, and neither does the radius. The tier 1 AP was also changed from plus 30% fire rate to plus 40% spirit resistance. So it seems like most of the heroes that had fire rate bonuses for allies have had this element of their kits gutted to instead focus on buffing a different element, either selfishly for their own kit or to support others in a different manner. But Valve hate giving you that extra ally fire rate now. It's at an all-time premium. In regards to Spectral Wall, another unique addition is that the segments of a wall can now be destroyed with 2 heavy melee hits. This will destroy one individual segment. Seems like Graves' tombstone design has influenced the McGinnis kit rework here too. Additionally, Spectral Wall now applies its slows to enemies that pass through it whilst being summoned, with the tier 1 ability point upgrade damage amp also being increased from 15% to 20%. And finally, for Spectral Wall, and an interesting twist, the tier 3 was reworked from adding a 0.75 second stun on impact to instead create 2 turrets for 8 seconds and increase the slow by 30%. This spawns 2 turrets on the side facing you, spread along the wall's radius. Technically, with the turret charge changes in this tier 3, if you get Echo Shard, you could create a decent sized army of turrets in seconds and open doors for creating McGinnis Thunderdomes full of turrets and even use them to instant spawn turrets in a split push for free objective damage and wave clear. A wild one, but I'm intrigued to play more with these and see just how it can be abused. Anyway, what's that over there? Is it an oasis? Oh no, it's just Mirage. Big ability changes here to one of the most loathed parts of his kit by the wider community in terms of ease of usability. Fire Scarabs have been massively redone. Fire Scarabs no longer have a limited duration to launch each one, instead now they'll function as a normal charged ability. Additionally, the collision and model size were also increased a bit, with the base charge count however being reduced from 4 to 2. They'll now immediately steal the HP from the target they make contact with. Valve also renamed Mirage's Tornado ability to Dust Devil, and it's big stonks for Mirage's ultimate though, with Traveler now being able to be cast whilst riding on the zipline. Additionally, it also now doesn't even have a channel window at all. Instead, it has a 3-second delay before teleporting that will be interrupted upon taking damage, and put it back on cooldown for 6 seconds. As a little bonus for the Jin enjoyer, Mirage's Traveler will now also target a location on the minimap rather than units, so you can teleport anywhere you'd like, and this will place you at ground level on that location. Teleporting away from Mirage, we arrive at the magnificent Mole duo, it's Mo and Krill. Deadlock fans rejoice, as finally Mo and Krill have been given their birthright. Burrow will now let you enter the tunnels. You can finally chase down those pesky Renmains that have been eating all your sinners and combo their heads in right in his own underground tunnels. Just don't get stuck down there, as you won't be able to get out until your burrow comes back off CD if you miss your exit window. Although, unfortunately for those Viper enjoyers, the Snake Girl from Staten Island still can't sliver her way into the tunnels. Maybe next patch. Valve, please fix. However, with the good comes the bad for Mo and Krill mains. Combo's cooldown was increased from 90 seconds to 150 seconds. In reality though, in lobbies with good communication, this ult is basically one free kill every time it's used, so upping the cooldown to 150 seconds does seem fair in my eyes. This will also be an indirect nerf to the HP bloat over the course of a game for Mo mains. Let's turn to the next chapter though, as it's Paige up next. Some fun thematic changes here, with Conjure Dragon being renamed to Bookworm. You'll also have the benefit of the tier 3 AP upgrade reward now also granting +1 charge. Similarly, Valve have tweaked the name of Defend and Fight to a much more fitting plot armor. Genius work on that one. Alas though, it's time to turn to the time thief herself. Paradox is our next target. Big changes and kit reworks here, some that might actually upset Paradox mains across the globe, but there's been some absolutely crazy strong buffs as well, with new intended ways to play her that might open the door to newer fans of the hero in my eyes. Firstly, Pulse Grenade's radius will now increase with +1 meters per pulse. However, Time War no longer damages enemies that go through it, meaning that the classic combo of grenade at your feet, wall, swap will no longer be the go-to. 2024 to 2026, RIP the Paradox combo. However, the gameplay feature of Time War is that it will now increase allied bullet speeds going through it by 100%. This says bullets, but it will actually affect all projectiles in Deadlock, give or take, so doorman bells, rem pillows, and even those AL C-130s that I mentioned in the intro. So the options for some very cheesy, very sudden bursts of damage in Paradox duos are just waiting to be discovered, so go limit test Paradox mains. On top of the sheer speed buff that it will give you, Time War now also increases your damage output by giving you a plus 30% weapon damage buff that will be applied to allied bullet damage. Oh, and this will also affect your own stuff as well, so this can be used on Carbine, allowing a different variety of kit into play for Paradox. Additionally, Time War's Tier 3 has been changed from silencing enemies to allow charges and granting +1 charge with 4 seconds of internal charge time between them. A big one though is that Paradoxical Swap, her ultimate at the Tier 3 AP upgrade Power Spike, has now been changed from giving you plus 15 meters of cast range to instead swap all additional enemies within a 7-meter radius and 10% max health damage dealt. This is massive in terms of theory. You could literally swap an entire team with this if they're too closely grouped together, giving you massive openings for combos and ways to synergize with your teammates' ultimates. You can now also alt cast it as well to only pull one player after the hotfix. Swapping over from Paradox to Pocket, let's see what they've changed to the heir to the Fairfax family fortune. Firstly, Barrage now lets you use stamina during the ability, and additionally, on top of that, for mechanical versatility, Barrage now also opens up the door for Flying Cloak to be used within the ability as well. Another huge one in my eyes is that Affliction's Tier 3 AP upgrade will now also prevent all healing on targets. That's gonna sting. From pockets to pillows, Rem's up next, and a lot of changes have been made here in regarding to his ultimate, Nap Time. The radius was decreased from 20 meters to 17 meters, which is understandable with you being able to cast this through walls. In a similar vein, however, the Tier 2 AP upgrade reward was changed from Unstoppable and minus 35% damage resist while channeling to instead be a 0.5 second sleep duration and plus 3 meters radius, compensating for the base radius reduction. Next up, the Naptime Tier 3 will now also grant plus 50% damage resist while channeling, so Rem can be focused without buying Unstoppable and have the ult cancelled, but on the other hand, he could also take a wallop and still cast the ult too. Enough about the Dream Figment though, let's see what's changed on Prisoner 4279. A lot of the built-in spirit scaling for 7 has been gutted with this patch. Move speed no longer scales with spirit power, but his sprint speed was increased from a rate of 0.6 meters to 1.8 meters to compensate for the lower base value that normally rises with spirit over the course of a game. Static Charge's cast range no longer scales with spirit, nor does Power Surge's duration, but Power Surge has one more additional max jump going up from 3 to 4, and for a little quality of life tweak, you can now use movement in the base ability of Stormcloud. So let's slowly make our way over to Shiv as he's up next. Now, outside of the movement kneecapping that Shiv got, where he's going to be rolling around the cursed apple in a wheelchair, Serrated Knives did see a large array of adjustments. Valve have gutted the impact damage from the knives, but you will be getting that damage back in the increased bleed and charges, so there's a trade-off, or else it would have been far too overpowered. The DPS per knife was increased from 4 to 10, with the bleed DPS spirit scaling also being increased from 0.13 to 0.15. AP upgrades wise, the Tier 2 got changed from plus 2 seconds of duration to instead now grant you plus 2 charges, so spamming bleeds with spirit might be the way to go. Ultimate wise, they also converted Killing Blow to be more skill shot oriented. It will no longer be unit targeted, you instead jump in the direction that you are facing forward with some small air control to play with, so you can scale this ability with range and potentially make some cool plays if you can hit your mark. On top of that, the Tier 3 AP now also grants you a 20-second recast window to the ultimate rather than just removing the cooldown on kill. A lot more balanced for what it is, but I can see why Shiv mains are massively feeling the burn on this one. With the amount of astronomical buffs the rest of the cast received, he's kind of had the opposite approach. Next on the docket after Shiv is Silver. For the Werewolf of New York, the changes are mostly focused around bringing down the strength and power level of Lycan form, as that's the root of her dominance since her debut. Low cooldowns, high stats, etc. More of a fix or tweak, but Tail Whack will no longer be considered a movement ability, so won't be affected by cancelling out movement usage. On top of that though, the real changes is that her ultimate Lycan Curse had its cooldown increased from 35 seconds to 50 seconds, and this overall feels fair, with the build-up being very forgiving, and chaining ults together was simple, with Express Shot and Silence Wave being able to build it up very quickly. 50 seconds is a better spot in my eyes as a Silver enjoyer, as it was off cooldown way too quickly. Her Wolf form bonus HP was also reduced from 100 to 75, but then buffed back to 125 following the hotfix. Additionally, the curse no longer grants plus 14% bullet and spirit resistance, or will it give you that plus 2 move speed? Looks like Valve have put the werewolf back in its cage for now, as they've absolutely given Silver a big ol' kneecapping. Our next hero to discuss is Vicious Victor. A few significant changes here for Victor enjoyers and haters, but to summarize the bigger ones, his pain battery will now start charged, and his jumpstart tier 3 AP reward also now provides +1 charge. However, the tier 3 no longer reduces cooldown. And Aura of Suffering's radius was increased from 7.7 meters to 10 meters. Another big bundle of changes though comes in the form of Vindicta's adjustments. Let's talk about the fundamental mechanical reworks and kit overhauls. Firstly, her fire rate no longer scales with spirit power, instead it will be bullet damage that now scales with spirit power at a rate of 0.022. Kit-wise, flight will now allow you to use both melee and parry whilst flying around, opening up some interplay with counterspell whilst in flight. Being in flight now also grants you a very decent +50% item cast range, also making a lot of support or split push items very strong on Vindicta, allowing you to shove further or follow up damage easier, with the flight tier 3 AP also now refreshing flight duration on hero kill, a massive boon in reality. Her crow familiar was also reworked too. It will now release a swarm of crows in a cone forward, hitting all enemies along the path, and it will fire an effectively an X spread pattern that come out like a crow shotgun, tagging anyone caught in the path and afflicting them with a swarm of crows. Her ultimate also got some great quality of life buffs too, with assassinate while scoped, no longer unscoping whilst using items, allowing some kit interplay with items on things like knockdown, alchemical fire and more. One of the biggest buffs is also the fact that assassinate now has a 4-second buffer on impact for bonus credit, similar to Grey Talon's owls. Next up, it's the start of the Viscous fandom. Gooners, I believe you're called. Lots of big buffs here for Viscous players, and it feels like he might be going into this patch in a super strong state. I'd always expected that he was a very strong hero pre-patch, but feel like this change will only further push him into a massively OP category. Splatter now bounces once by default, and additionally, Splatter's ground effect now also increases slide distance by 60% for you and your allies, so you can zip along New York. On top of this, Splatter's tier 3 still adds 2 bounces, so you can shotgun people to death with goo. They also tweaked the Q. It now has a very brief period where allies cannot cancel to prevent accidental cancels similar to airdrop. Puddle Punch now grants 30% air control while affecting yourself or allies, and Goo Ball no longer can carry urn. Finally, Goo Ball can also now use abilities and items at base level rather than being locked behind the tier 3 AP reward, but they did tweak the ultimate's bullet and spirit resist by reducing it from 60% to 35%. This seems fair to me, as the escape potential for Goo Ball is already vast with the movement and stun potential, let alone being unkillable from attacks, so at least this is a good nerf for the masses. It does seem like Yoshi is monitoring the situation though, as both Splatter and Puddle Punch had spirit scaling nerfs in the hotfix. Moving on, we can see what's changed with Warden. The Alchemist Vigilante has got a mixed bag of changes. Weapon damage might be on the downtrend, but his spirit-oriented elements of his kit have been massively increased. Firstly, Willpower, Warden's Barrier, will now scale with Spirit Power and the base ability at a rate of 0.5 per Spirit Power. Additionally, Binding Words Tier 1 was changed from +1 second of immobilized duration to a +20% bullet damage on trapped heroes for 5 seconds, giving you more room to follow up damage and burst down targets when caged. Additionally, the Tier 3 AP has also been changed from +20% bullet damage to a -18 second cooldown reduction, and it will silence enemies until they escape or whilst they're trapped. Cages aside, let's talk about his ultimate. The Last Stand channeling bullet and spirit resist was increased from 30% to 60%, with a tier 3 AP upgrade no longer granting +50% bullet and spirit resist. Instead, the tier 3 now also grants you unstoppable whilst channeling, so you can't be knocked out of getting the ultimate off if you take a gamble on a risky ult. Talking of degenerate gamblers though, let's have a look at the Wraith rework. Card trick has been overhauled, and cards will now have specific suites with special bonuses. The card types operate as follows. Spades grant +60% damage output, diamonds will cut enemy resistances by -8% for 5 seconds, but this effect will not stack. Hearts will heal Wraith for 75 HP with 1.0 spirit scaling. clubs apply a 30% slow for 3 seconds, and the Joker will have all of the previously listed effects, but also bounce to an additional enemy target within 20 meters. Card Trick has had its base charge count increase from 1 to 2, alongside increasing the base damage being reduced from 60 to 45, with its spirit scaling also being cut down from 1.0 to 0.55. Card Trick's build-up now also takes 20% longer, however the cooldown was increased from 0.75 seconds to 0.5 seconds. It will also now highlight the card that will be thrown out next, so you'll always know what suit will hit them. Card Trick's AP upgrades have also been changed, with the tier 1 being increased from +1 charges to +2 charges. Additionally, we've also seen a big change to full auto. Firstly, it will no longer affect allies. Of course, previously it gave half fire rate to allies, buffing their output of damage. However, now the base ability will also deal +2 spirit damage per bullet with a ratio of 0.03 spirit scaling, with full auto's tier 2 being changed from giving you that increased spirit damage per bullet to granting you +10% fire rate and 3 seconds of duration. But it's the big change on tier 3 that's important. The tier 3 AP reward has been changed, and this is the best part in my eyes. Going from granting +15% bullet and spirit lifesteal and increased spirit scaling, to now giving Wraith unlimited ammo and increased spirit scaling at a rate of +0.06, so she can once again be the split push monster of your dreams, giving her incredible objective shred potential with unlimited ammo to play with. Her ultimate was also given a massive pass on its functionality, with telekinesis no longer being a projectile. Instead, now it instantly lifts the target for 0.75 seconds and then gives you a location target on the ground, allowing you to choose where you want to throw the affected hero. After the 0.75 seconds is over, it will then throw the hero towards that location, traveling upwards of 15 meters away. The target will then take 100 damage and have a 40% move slow applied, and be prevented from using stamina and movement related items alongside ability usage for 2.75 seconds. They even reworked the tier 3 power spike, changing it from telekinesis bounces to another nearby target to instead granting an additional +1.5 second debuff duration and a +6 meter throw and cast range, allowing you to launch heroes even further away in a pinch. You could utilize this as a mini solo target lash ult in reality to throw enemies into your walkers or even your base depending on the situation. With that big field day of Thanos Wraith buffs out in the open, let's check out the last hero that I've selected to cover for tonight's mega patch breakdown episode. Yamato, a decent chunk of changes here, so thought I'd get it under the microscope. Firstly, you can now cast parry directly while channeling power slash to fire the power slash and parry simultaneously. Additionally, Valve have renamed Flying Strike to Flying Slash, and it will now deal light melee damage rather than spirit. Flying Slash also had its tier 3 change from can grapple to ally heroes and +6 weapon damage for 10 seconds to can grapple to ally heroes alongside becoming charge base and granting +2 charges with 3 seconds between those charges. Then, for Yamato's ultimate, Shadow Transformation, the cooldown was increased from 110 seconds to 130 seconds, with the tier 1 AP upgrade being changed from granting 14% fire rate to instead giving you +5 weapon damage. Lastly, Shadow Transformation's tier 2 now also reduces the cooldown by 25 seconds, making up for the overall base increase of its cooldown. Outside of these heroes and changes I've picked out to cover in tonight's episode, we also saw a lot of minor and major value changes to many of the heroes I've mentioned, and others too, like Mina or Lady Geist. For a quick note on Geist though, I do think her change is a sleeper OP, with the self-sustain being more or less far better now, taking less damage on self-cast fluorescence bombs. I'm not sure if she's going to be beating some of the biggest and strongest winners of this meta-destroying update. I'm sure we'll see when the Valve balance patch dust starts to settle into next week, but she's absolutely had some big improvements for the Geist mains out there. Again, it's a bit of a different approach to Patch Notice this time around with a sheer volume of changes, and Daisy and I being away from home. So I hope you're enjoying the quality and nature of Patch Notice all the same. As always, do be sure to let Daisy know you're enjoying her amazing graphics in the comment on this one, as it was a lot of work. Finally then, let's just have a quick look at the new 800 soul cost tier 1 spirit item they've added, Golden Golden Goose Egg. In terms of how this item itself works, functionality-wise, if you've not yet checked it out in-game, it's a soul generation item for the spirit category, giving you a bank of 90 souls per minute alongside generating golden boons for your hero to be received upon activating the item to consume it and remove it from your inventory, whilst also gaining the banked benefits stored inside the egg. When it first shipped, it was giving you 75 souls per minute, but that's come up after the first hotfix as the egg did seem a bit weak. From my maths, I feel like it's going to be value-wise at its best, worth selling off around 14 to 16 minutes into the game after buying it. However, you could technically hold on to it for as long as you'd like and sell it off for the golden buffs and the bank stored to invest into a higher tier item just before a big team fight or objective fight when needed. It's a unique item and will have a 10% flat damage penalty for as long as you're carrying it, so it's going to dock your damage output in lane massively. If you rush it as your first buy around a minute or so into a match of Deadlock, it will then start ticking up its value, of course. However, I can see the potential viability on low poke supports or heroes that generate farms self-sufficiently, like Rem with box roots in the tunnels, for passive soul gem. Although I'm not sure how I feel about the item overall yet, and don't think I'll be incorporating it into my own builds, as I find the damage trade-off to be a big drawback, with the value of the item taking a little while to come online. But let me know your thoughts down below. Right then, with that said, that's basically everything you need to know about tonight's patch. Honestly, this one was absolutely massive and took a lot of a lack of sleep and grinding to get this episode ready for you. So I do hope you guys enjoyed tonight's episode of Patch Notice. As always, thanks so much to our YouTube members for the support, allowing myself and Daisy to do this full time. We love you guys and really appreciate all the support you've been showing myself and Daisy here on Dead Air. You are all very much appreciated. If you didn't know, you can join these massive legends and become featured in the end credits of Patch Notice by becoming a Deadhead and joining our members program. This has been one hell of a patch with nearly 2,000 lines of changes, over 500 gigabytes of footage filmed for the episode alone, and many graphics all made by Daisy by hand. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope it's helped you understand what you'll be facing out there in the world of Deadlock. Now then, with that said, it's time for me to actually get back out there and enjoy it, before Yoshi drops the next balance patch minutes after this video comes out, and we have to do it all over again. See you in the cursed apple streets, Deadheads. Bye-bye.